So just a couple more of your guys' product line I wanted to go over. The bucking machines, and then I want to touch on your T0, which is obviously a massive machine. But let's just touch on the bucking machines really quickly. For people who aren't super familiar, what is the difference between a bucking machine and a trimmer? And, maybe you could talk a little bit about why the B4 bucker is something that growers should consider putting into their lineup.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up bucking. It's still considered to be a huge bottleneck in today's industry, even at a commercial standpoint. We see a lot of companies that will continue to do it by hand, and it does serve its purpose to continue to buck by hand in some commercial facilities. We do have a bucker. It's called the B4. It's been out for probably 6 or 7 years now. The main differences I would say are highlights features to ours compared to, a Munch machine or a Mobius Bucker is going to be one, like horsepower. We have a pretty industrial built 1 horsepower motor on our Bucker. So it's made to and built to be ran for a long period of time. Another key feature is just the quick release valve for the cartridge on the Bucker. So just like wet trimming, if you're bucking even wet or dry, it's a pretty dirty job over a long course of hours, especially if you have a high plant count. So the versatility in having a disposable cartridge is you're able to quick release that, take it off, and put on another one in about 10 seconds and get right back to work. So there's not really any downtime to cleaning versus a lot of the buckers on the market right now are stationary, meaning that, if it's getting gunked up, you're gonna have to unplug that unit and take off the faceplate, do a deep clean, put it back on, plug it back in, and get back to work. So we take away the downtime of cleaning on the B4 bucker. The biggest one I would say right now, the design setup of ours is very similar to what you would find in a Munch machine or a Mobius or Centuron is, two rollers that sit very close to one another. Some of our competitors touch each other, which gets them gunked up a little bit more. Some of them are like our design where you have two spring loaded shocks that absorb any kind of friction when a plant stock goes through. That longevity increases and you're able to go for a little bit longer period of time. But really, we've not dug in a whole lot on implementing a new design for a bucker. It's definitely one of those things in the works, but I personally recommend, even though we design and sell a bucker, if you're doing anything craft or indoor and you're looking at automating that process or how can we save like labor hours, but you're maybe not utilizing our technology on the trimming side yet, or even on the curing side yet, stick with doing bucking manually. I recommend that just because I almost like compare it to like baking, right? There's a lot of different steps that go into baking a cake or doing sourdough bread that you can screw up like that if you don't stick to the recipe, or if the room environment, the RH and the temp isn't accurate, or if the yeast isn't, where it needs to be prior to baking, it can get screwed up. And with us, I think the biggest difference is we're able to actually honestly admit that to people and say, hey, doing it by hand right now might be costing you guys, an arm and a leg when it comes to the labor, but there's other areas of your process that we can save that money and still increase the quality. So with bucking, things that come to risk when you're doing that is obviously your crowns of the plant. You typically, even in a B4 bucker, if you're safe for doing dry, you'll see some poppage. Even in competitors' buckers, you will too. Where by poppage, I mean like a crown of an A might turn into a B and two C's. And eventually, what you're doing is degrading the quality of the plant, and you're also degrading like your ultimate yield, right? Anytime you break down a cola and you're automating that process, you're running a risk, or even doing it by hand. You're adding more steps that potentially is going to decrease your yield or your take home weight at the end of the day. So majority of my customers, especially West Coast guys, are still doing that by hand. And that's most importantly just to preserve the quality of the flour. Room environment plays a huge factor when you're doing that. Same thing with, the drying room all the way to cure. That's where we typically hit hard on when it comes to process flow is the environments at the end of the day.